I was gasping for air, struggling not to drown and fighting for my life. My whole body was filled with shocked and traumatized because I had just been pushed into the lake by my grandson Liam, while my son Martin and his wife Jane stood there watching, laughing and without making any effort to rescue me. Though I was old and weak, I tried until I was able to drag myself out of the lake. I was crawling and shivering from the cold of the lake, still traumatized at what had just happened. That day I realized that those I loved, cherished and sacrificed everything for in life, my own family did not love me or want me alive, so I made a decision that I would take everything away from them and make them regret hurting me. Before we continue with the story, comment where you are watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel to get more uplifting stories about women that have been betrayed and mistreated by family members but still got back on their feet with a happy ending. I had never imagined that a simple family barbecue, something so familiar and so ordinary, would turn into a moment that would forever change me. I remember the moment so clearly, the feeling of the cool grass under my feet as I stood near the lake, watching my grandson Liam. He used to run into my arms with wildflowers, calling me the best part of this house. But today there was a coldness in his eyes. He wasn't the sweet boy I remembered. Instead he was taller, older and somehow distant. There was a smirk on his face, a look of amusement in his eyes as he approached me. "Come on, Grandma," he said, his voice thick with mockery. "Let's see if you can still swim like you used to." I was taken aback, confused. What was he playing at? But before I could react, before I could even process what was happening, his hands were on my back, shoving me forward. I didn't even have time to brace myself. My body hit the water with a shock that stole my breath. I hadn't swum in over 30 years. Not since the surgery that left my shoulder weaker than it had ever been. Panic surged through me. The water rushed into my mouth, my chest tightened, and I fought to stay afloat. I could barely breathe, my body thrashing in a futile attempt to find my footing. But the world was muffled by the water, the sound of my gasping breaths swallowed by the waves. Through the haze of panic, I could hear them. Liam's cruel laughter echoed across the water. His voice, once so sweet, now filled with mockery. "Come on, Grandma," he said. "Tough old bird, huh?" I struggled harder. No one moved to help me. My son Martin stood there, his arms crossed, doing nothing. His wife Jane took a sip of wine and muttered, "She's being dramatic." The isolation I felt in that moment cut deeper than any physical pain could. No one cared. Somehow, I managed to drag myself out of the lake, my knees scraped and raw. I collapsed onto the dock, trembling, water dripping from my gray hair. Liam's smirk was still there, the laughter of my family in the background, ringing in my ears. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, cold and humiliated, knowing deep down that something inside me had shifted. I vowed then and there, with every ounce of strength in me, that they would never get the chance to drown me again. That night, I sat alone in my room, the events of the day swirling in my mind like a storm I couldn't escape. The reflection in the mirror still haunted me, the pale, exhausted face staring back at me. I wasn't sure who that person was anymore. The woman in the mirror seemed far removed from the vibrant, loving grandmother I once prided myself on being. But tonight, the pain from the lake and the humiliation it brought me wasn't as sharp. Instead, it was something quieter, something deeper, like the sting of a wound that wouldn't heal. I couldn't stop thinking about Liam. My sweet, innocent boy. What had happened to him? The memories of him running into my arms as a little boy, full of joy and love, seemed like they belonged to another lifetime. I remembered the way he used to look at me, with such admiration. But now he looked at me with something else. Disdain, maybe. I had become nothing more than an inconvenience to him, a fragile, aging woman whose presence was a joke to be ridiculed. That grin, the one that twisted his face into something unrecognizable, was what haunted me the most. It wasn't the smile of a boy I knew. It was the smile of someone who had learned to disguise cruelty as strength, to mock weakness rather than care for it. Somewhere along the way, my grandson had become a man who thought belittling others was a way to show his superiority. I had watched him transform into someone I didn't even recognize, and it was clear to me now. He'd been shaped by his parents, who never bothered to show him empathy, who treated me like a burden rather than a blessing. The silence in the room pressed in on me, and I clenched my fists, willing the anger to fade. But it didn't. Instead, I found something else, something stronger. It wasn't revenge that I felt. It was resolve. I had been weak for far too long. But no more. I wouldn't let this humiliation be my last chapter. They thought they could drown me, but they had no idea that I had already started planning my escape. The next morning, as the sunlight filtered through the curtains, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't surprised when Martha entered. She was always there when I needed her, never asking for anything in return. She saw the pain in my eyes before I could even speak. Without a word, she handed me an envelope. I opened it slowly, and inside there was a business card, Peter Harlow, estate attorney. Along with it, a list of financial assets. The accounts I had kept over the years, the trust papers, the college fund for Liam. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. This wasn't just a friendly visit. Martha knew, without a doubt, what had happened and what needed to be done. "You don't have to make a decision today," she said, her voice calm, but there was fire in her eyes. "But I think it's time you stop playing the role of the victim." I looked at the card in my hand. Peter Harlow. He would help me secure what was rightfully mine. But this wasn't about getting back at them. It wasn't about revenge. This was about strategy. It was time to take control of my life again, to stop being the one who was tossed aside. "I'm not looking for revenge," I said, my voice steady. "I just want them to understand that there are consequences." Martha nodded. "Then let's make them count." As I looked at the list of my assets, my mind began to work, turning the pieces over in my head. It was time to stop being the helpless grandmother. I wasn't going to be anyone's pawn anymore. I had the power to shape my own future, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. The plan was set in motion, and I knew there was no turning back. I could feel it, the way my body seemed to move slower with each passing day, how my hands trembled just a little more than usual, how my thoughts would occasionally wander as if they didn't quite belong to me anymore. At first, it was subtle, nothing that anyone would really notice unless they were paying attention. But I started to lean into it, letting them see what they wanted to see. A frail, forgetful woman, the image of someone too old to be of any use. At first, it was just a bit of feigned confusion. I would pause during a conversation, pretending that I couldn't remember something as simple as where I'd put my glasses or the name of a movie I'd mentioned earlier. And every time I did, I could feel the shift in the room, the way Martin would exchange those looks with Jane, the way Liam would roll his eyes as if to say, "Not again." But with each passing day, I played the part more convincingly. I stumbled when I walked, taking an extra second to steady myself. I would leave my cup of tea on the kitchen counter, just far enough away from the sink that it seemed like I'd forgotten to clean up. I let them think I was slipping, let them see me as weaker, older, a woman fading into the background of their busy lives. They weren't aware that every action, every slip-up, was part of the plan. Martin had started whispering about me, and Jane, oh Jane, had stopped even pretending to care. I could hear her sighing from the other room when I asked her for help. "She's getting worse," Martin would mutter, and I could almost hear the disdain in his voice. Sometimes I'd catch Jane's eye, and I would see it, a flicker of impatience, as though my mere presence was an inconvenience. I wasn't asking for much, but to them, my simple requests were becoming more than they were willing to bear. And Liam, my dear, sweet grandson, once full of love for me, once eager to tell me about his day, had become something else entirely. He barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was with that same coldness in his eyes that I had seen on the dock. He didn't greet me anymore, not with warmth, not with affection. No, now it was as though I was nothing more than a fixture in the house, something to be tolerated but never loved. But all the while I watched, listened. Every sharp word, every eye roll, every dismissive glance, each one was carefully recorded in my mind. I could hear them clearly, though they thought I was fading. And I let them think I was slipping. After all, They had no idea that beneath the fragile exterior I was growing sharper by the day. I began to write things down, little snippets here and there. I kept a mental log of every insult, every moment where they treated me as though I were invisible. It was all coming together. They thought they were fooling me, that I was too old to understand, but the truth was I was learning them, one word at a time. Their cruelty wasn't something I could fight back against just yet. But it was something I could remember. Something I would use when the time was right. The pieces were falling into place, and I was ready. They were playing into my hands, and they didn't even know it. The dinner party was supposed to be an ordinary evening. Just another one of those social gatherings where everyone smiles, eats, and pretends to enjoy each other's company. The kind of event where everyone performs their roles, and nothing is ever said that could reveal the cracks beneath the surface. But tonight, I found myself at the heart of a different kind of performance. I was no longer part of the charade. I was just the silent observer. I had stayed in the kitchen as long as I could, trying to busy myself with the dishes, but the laughter and chatter from the living room seeped through the walls, distracting me. I could hear Liam's voice rising above the others, telling some story that made the others laugh. It wasn't the first time his laughter had sounded different. Colder, but this time something about it sent a chill down my spine. My hands, busy drying the plates, faltered for a moment. Curiosity tugged at me. I slipped quietly into the hallway, standing just outside the door. There, in the dim light, I could see the group gathered around the table, glasses of wine in hand, hanging on Liam's every word. And then I heard it. "You should have seen her," he said, a gleam in his eye. Flailing around like a flipped turtle. The room erupted in laughter. My heart dropped. I stood there, unable to move, as Liam's cruel words continued to echo in my mind. This wasn't just a joke. This was mockery. This was him relishing the pain he had caused me, sharing it with people who weren't just indifferent to my suffering. They were celebrating it. Jane's voice cut through the laughter, thick with sarcasm. "She's a liability, not family." That was it. Final straw. The words felt like a slap across my face, colder than the water I had choked on days earlier. I had given them everything, my love, my care, my life. And this is what I had become to them. A liability. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I simply turned away from the door, my heart hardening with a quiet resolve. My legs carried me toward the stairs, every step feeling heavier than the last. I didn't need to hear any more. I had heard enough. When I reached my room, I walked to the desk, my hands steady despite the turmoil inside. I picked up the phone and dialed the number I'd been keeping in my mind since the moment I'd made my decision. Peter Harlow. It was time. I didn't waste words. When he picked up, I simply said, "I'm ready." And for the first time in a long time, I felt a surge of power, the kind that only comes from taking control of your own fate. The days stretched on, each one a quiet reminder of the decision I had made. At first, the weight of it all felt like a shadow, creeping over my every thought. But as the days passed, I grew more resolute, more certain that the path I had chosen was the only one left for me. My family, the ones who had once been my everything, had shown me who they really were. They were no longer worthy of my care or my wealth. So, I began the process of shifting my assets, piece by piece, away from the people who had come to view me as nothing more than a burden. I didn't do it recklessly. No, I had learned the art of discretion over the years. Slowly, deliberately, I redirected funds that would have gone to Martin, Liam, and Jane, and funneled them into causes that still held humanity in high regard. Charities, scholarships, community programs. Places where my money could actually make a difference. Places where gratitude, not entitlement, was the currency. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was about sending a message. The legacy I was leaving behind wasn't just about wealth. It was about principles. Principles that my family had long since abandoned. Each transfer, each reallocation of funds, felt like a small act of defiance. A quiet rebellion against those who thought they could take everything from me and still call it love. I woke up early one morning, the air crisp and clear, and the decision had already been made. I walked through my house, pausing to look at the things I'd collected over the years. The memories, the mementos, the symbols of a life once lived in love and joy. But they no longer meant what they once had. The house that had once felt like a home now felt like a prison. A place full of echoes, of laughter long gone, of moments that could never be reclaimed. I packed only what was essential: 3 sweaters, a journal, Cliff's old flannel shirt, and a small photo of baby Liam. These were the things I would take with me. The rest stayed behind. By the time Martha arrived, my bags were packed and my heart was already on its way to freedom. She was just as calm as always, her bright turquoise jacket standing out against the soft morning light. Without a word, we loaded the car. There was no need for more discussion. She had been my confidant through it all, never asking questions, always supporting. Together we left the house behind. We drove in silence, the road stretching out before us, 2 states away from the life I was leaving behind. Silver Haven, the peaceful retirement community, awaited. It was modest, quiet, and everything I needed. No more pretending. No more playing a role. By the time my family woke up, I was already gone. There was no dramatic farewell, no angry words exchanged. Just a quiet, powerful departure that spoke louder than anything I could have said. I was no longer part of their world. And they would never know where to find me. Silver Haven was everything I had hoped for and more. It was quiet, peaceful, and filled with a sense of calm that I hadn't known in years. The small room I called home was modest, but it was mine. I had everything I needed here. No reminders of what had been, no expectations to meet. Just a simple life, surrounded by green spaces and kind people who didn't look at me as if I were something to be ignored or, worse, discarded. The first few days felt like a fog lifting from my mind. I spent time walking through the gardens, sitting on the balcony of my room, letting the sunlight warm my face. For the first time in so long I felt like I could breathe. No more pretending. No more living for the approval of others. I was free. But the peace I felt was not without a cost. I knew there would be no turning back once I took the next step. My family would soon discover what had happened to me, and while I didn't expect them to understand, I needed them to know why I had left. I needed them to know that it wasn't abandonment, it was freedom. Sitting at the small desk in my room, I pulled out a sheet of paper. The words flowed easily, not fueled by anger, but by something much deeper: truth. I wrote to Martin, to Liam, and to Jane. I explained the fate of my inheritance and the university fund for Liam. I told them about the charities I had supported, the foundations that would benefit from the resources they had once taken for granted. I didn't say it with malice, but I didn't sugarcoat it either. Couldn't. I wrote that I had given them everything, and that in return, they had shown me nothing but disregard. I told them that my absence wasn't a punishment, it was simply the consequence of their actions. I had no more to give. They had taken all they could, and now it was time for me to reclaim what had always been mine: my dignity, my peace, my freedom. When I finished the letter, I sealed it in an envelope and placed it on the desk, knowing it would soon be read aloud to them. A week later, Peter Harlow arrived. He was professional as always, calm and collected. The letter was his job now, the final act in this quiet revolution. I could already imagine the shock on their faces when they heard the words I had written. The panic that would surge through them, the scramble to understand what had happened to me. But I didn't care anymore. From my balcony, I could see the garden stretching out before me, a riot of color and life. I took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill my lungs. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by expectations. I was free. They would call it abandonment, but I knew better. It wasn't abandonment. It was liberation. My silence had been my strength all along, and now I was finally living on my own terms. And that, for the first time in a long time, felt like peace.